How many times in the Gospel of John, the gospel that I read from, does the word grace appear? How many times do you think? The word grace. Grace, the central tenet of the Christian faith. How many times does the word grace appear in John's gospel? Somebody say it like you mean it. 37, 35, 42. I feel like we're on The Price is right now. Like Showcase Showdown. 0, 0, 0, 0. Last night at 5 o'clock, somebody said, 100. You know, Al, we're a whole lot closer to your number than 35. Did you know in John's gospel, the word grace only appears 4 times? What? I know. 4 times. Matthew's gospel, it's everywhere. Luke's gospel, certainly more than 4. Even Mark's gospel, the shortest of all the gospels, has grace more often than in John's gospel, which is confusing because John's gospel is the longest of the gospels. And yet grace only appears 4 times. What's even more interesting about that is that the 4 times grace appears, it's all in chapter 1. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. Glory as of the only Son of the Father, full of and truth. John bore witness about him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me. And from his fullness we have all received upon," there's 3. "For the law was given through Moses, and truth came through Jesus Christ." All clumped together in 2 verses. That's it. And I've often wondered why that is the case. They're all right there in the beginning. We start John's gospel, the longest gospel, the most ethereal, the most intellectual of all the gospels, the one influenced by Greek philosophy the most. The tenet central message of the Christian faith, of our theology, only appears 4 times. And what I've come to believe as I've studied through John's gospel is that the author of John wasn't interested in telling us about grace as much as showing us in an operative way what grace looks like. In the first chapter, we hear that Jesus came to give grace upon grace, full of truth. The law came through Moses. Something new is coming through Jesus Christ. And while the word grace is not mentioned again for the rest of John, what we have are 7 signs and wonders that Jesus performs that reveals what grace looks like. It's really beautiful. Now, a sign and a wonder are more than miracles. They seek to do 2 things. The 7 signs of Jesus, first, they all instill faith in the people that witness them. Every one of the signs and wonders isn't just a miracle for a miracle's sake. The purpose of the miracle is that people would have faith and would believe that this one named Jesus was the anointed one, the Messiah, the one that came to redeem all of humanity. But secondly, each of the signs and wonders does more than that. They also reveal a part of Christ's identity. They reveal the heart of Jesus, the why behind the what in his ministry. And each of the 7 signs and wonders reveals the abundant, undeserved blessing of God. Abundant, undeserved blessing of God. In other words, grace. That's my working definition of grace. An abundant, undeserved blessing. We throw the word grace around a lot as people of faith, as Christians. Grace, grace, grace. And so often, we are trained to think about grace in a one-dimensional way. Grace is needed when something has been done or said, or we've committed an act in which we need forgiveness. We associate grace almost wholly with sin. And this is true. There's an element of grace that has to do, a response to the brokenness in our lives and in the world. This is the undeserved part. But I think when we view grace solely through the lens of forgiveness, we miss out on the fullness of what grace actually is, at least revealed through Jesus. It's also an abundant blessing. Grace is more than just forgiving a wrongdoing. It's receiving something that is more than we could ever expect. It's an abundant, undeserved blessing. And we see that first in John's gospel in a little town called Cana in Galilee at a wedding. It's a familiar story to many people. They're at a wedding party, and what we know about weddings in the first century is that they would often last 3 weeks. Celebrations were really important and central to the community. We're told in the gospel that the ceremony had taken place 3 days prior. The couple is already married, but they're in the 3rd day of celebrating, of partying, of enjoying, of eating and drinking and dancing and all of those wonderful things. When the wine runs out, we sort of laugh at that. But it was a serious issue. We know culturally in the first century, having enough wine for the celebration was important for the host. It would have brought great shame upon the host of the wedding to run out, so this couple could not celebrate. And I love this story. A whole sermon could be preached about how Jesus performs the first wonder. I love the fact that the people who actually experience the miracle are the servants. Did you catch that? I think it reveals something about the heart of Jesus. The people that find faith through this are the disciples and the servants, the people behind the scenes that are equipping and enabling others to party. And I love how when Jesus takes all of this ordinary wine for the rite of purification and transforms it into something that will help celebrate, the people that benefit is far greater than those that experience the miracle. This too reveals something about the heart of Jesus. I love that. The undeserved part. They didn't plan. They didn't buy enough. They drank too much in the first 3 days. Undeserved. We're going to provide more than enough. Not only restores the host of the party and removes shame from him, it blesses everyone in the community. That's the grace that we're talking about when we think about Jesus. Because what we know to be true is that when real, undeserved, abundant blessing is extended to somebody, it impacts an entire community, not just that one individual. I've been thinking a lot this last week, different stories going down memory lane as I've been reflecting on the passing of my father-in-law, Jerry Vianello. And as I've been thinking about stories and memories of his life, I was reminded of a moment of grace that I received when I totally didn't deserve it. Years ago, for 10 years, before I came to Good Shepherd, I served across town in Loveland at Prince of Peace. And I made that drive every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, depending on kid activities, from my home in Marymount, up Miami Road, into Madeira, turned right on Camargo, and head toward Loveland. Some of you have driven that route. And if you're familiar with that route, you know that when you pass Kroger and Madeira and you're on Camargo and you're headed toward Loveland, you know that the speed limit changes from 45 to 25 to 35, back to 25. Eventually you're at 45. Then you're winding through a part of Indian Hill and you feel like you could almost go 60. You shouldn't. You've done it too, right? And it's one of those routes that I've driven so many times in my life. We all have them, right? Who here has a route, a commute to work or to somebody's house that you could do half asleep? It was an ordinary day, like a Tuesday or a Thursday, and got my little self into my car, and I was making my way to work to go do God's work at the church. When I kind of get past the train tracks and I'm headed down Camargo, and I see way in the distance of my rearview mirror those red and blue lights. You know what's coming. And I think to myself, that's a ways back. That's not me. If it is me, he'll see my army plate and he'll pass. You know, I'm tight with the police. He wasn't going to pass, and he let out one of those whoop whoop, you know, like the beeps they do, like pull over, fool, beep. So I pull over and I'm thinking, oh, no. And I see him get out of his SUV and I'm watching him walk up and I think I know him. Like, he's a Madeira officer, but did he used to be an officer in Marymount? Do I know him? And he asked for my license and registration and he's right at the window and I give it to him and I'm like, I know him. He was a police officer in Marymount. And I was on city council for 4 years in Marymount, and I was the safety chair. The police chief reported to me. I used to be his boss. But does he recognize me? And then I'm like, that's the officer that grew up in Marymount. And now he works for, and I'm thinking as he goes to run my tags, like, do I mention it? Do I work the angle? Do I let him know, like, do I bring up something about my military experience? Like, do I work that angle? Like, I need to get out of this ticket. And I'm like, no, don't do it. Don't be that guy. Don't be that guy. We've all wanted to be that guy. And he comes back to my window and like, roll it down. I roll it back down because it's cold out. Excuse me. He hands it back to me. He looks at me. He says, are you Jerry Vianello's son-in-law? I said, I am. Drive safe, have a good day. What? I said, like, he's like, have a good day, drive safe. Yes. Oh my God, what? Like I got out of it. I got, Jerry probably coached him in football growing up or something. He didn't remember that I used to be his boss, but we were on city council, but he remembers the father-in-law, you know, and I'm sitting there and I don't get pulled over very often. Maybe you do, but I don't know the proper etiquette. So I'm like, do I pull out before he does? So I just sit on the side of the road. I'm like, is he going to go or do I? So then I turn my blinker on to pull out onto the road. Like I'm like being really good at this point, you know, and I drive the rest of the way through Sims Township, Indian Hill to Loveland, and I'm going under the speed limit. You've been there. And I'm just thinking like, what? I deserved the ticket. Because he told me at one point, he's like, you were going 43 and a 25. Don't judge me, you've done it. And I'm driving to work and I'm thinking, I deserve the ticket, but I didn't get it. Now, here's what I know to be true. As silly of a story as that is, I've gotten tickets before that. Now, years before that, I do not want you to think I'm a reckless driver. I even got a ticket once going on a vacation to Florida in Tennessee somewhere, and I had to do an online course through the Department of Transportation in Tennessee. It was such a hassle. And all of those times, especially when you're out of state, you get the ticket. There is no getting out of getting that ticket. It is tax revenue for the great state of Tennessee. And in all of those times that I've received tickets when I've deserved them and I've received the right punishment the right consequence for the action, I've driven a little more carefully for about 2 weeks. You know what I mean? Here's the thing. Every time I am at that little intersection in Madeira, I am a perfect driver. And you know the difference? An undeserved abundant blessing, grace. I've gone through a lot of my life thinking that punishment, consequences are the answer. And I'm not going to stand up and say there isn't a place and a time for consequences to actions to learn lessons. Certainly we know that to be true for children, for life, goodness. But what I also believe, and what I believe to be more true, is that grace, undeserved abundant blessing, has more potential and more capacity to change human behavior than punishment does. It's just true. It's the Jesus way. We live in a world where there are consequences for actions, and we need that. It probably would be chaotic if we didn't have that. And yet we can never lose sight that as people who follow Jesus, the ethic and the predominant position we should have is one first of grace. It is not the long drive home or the punishment that will change behavior. It is grace that has the capacity to transform. And as I was thinking about that story this week, I was feeding all 3 kids one night, trying to do dinner, and you know it can be wild. With an 11, 8, and 4-year-old, and Luke, 4-year-old, beautiful little boy, bundle of energy, is learning that he has to eat the vegetables on his plate, and he can't just demand yogurt squeeze tubes. You gotta eat a vegetable, and he's not wanting to. And he's throwing a little bit of a fit. Noah and Brianna ate their vegetables, ate their food. They're wanting to get dessert out, and I'm like, Noah, don't get ice cream out because Luke's not ready for it yet. You imagine the scene that is unfolding. It's happened in your lives, right? And now Luke is getting upset, and he's running over to the freezer, and he's like, ice cream, ice cream. I'm like, Luke, you gotta eat vegetables, but you gotta eat some. It's good for you. And he's getting really upset. And so I tried, how old are you, Luke? 4. But then you gotta eat 4 green beans. That doesn't go very far. And now Luke's getting angry and upset. And the inclination in myself is to match the energy, right? You've been there. You're trying to stay calm. You're trying to stay cool. You're trying to be with it and the regulated one, but it's crazy. And you just want to be ugh. But thinking of this story and this sermon, I was practice what you preach, Lorne. So I said, Luke, come here. I soften my tone. Luke, come here. He looks at me. Ice cream crazed eyes. And I said, Luke, come in the dining room. So I come in, bring him in. I get down on my knees. I get right at his level. And I said, Luke, you're not in trouble. You're not in trouble. It took me 4 or 5 times of saying that for him to I said, but it's not okay what you're doing, buddy. We got to use our words. We have to talk. Can you please, Luke, eat 2 green beans? He's withered me down a little bit. And guess what? We went back in the table, and it worked. It hasn't worked since. But it worked. And these little vignettes of my life, of your life, I think they're trying to teach us something. That what Jesus continually offers us is often undeserved, abundant blessing. Think about his life. Think about every story. Jesus never chose punishment. He never dealt consequence. Even to the religious authorities he was so angry at, he never made them pay the price. On the cross, what did he say? Father, forgive that they don't know what they're doing. To the criminals that probably committed real crimes to his left and right, he said, today you will be with me in paradise, undeserved, abundant blessing. And in a few minutes, Pastor Alex will be here at this table, and he's going to say a lot of words he says every week that we hear every week, but I want you to hear him. On the night in which he was betrayed, he took bread, he took wine, he broke it, he poured it. He fed his best friends that were in cahoots with the soldiers and the people that wanted to kill him, and he fed them. And he fed the one that would deny knowing him 3 times. Undeserved, abundant blessing. Here's the point, church. No matter what you've done, no matter how you feel about yourself, no matter how shame-laden, guilt-ridden you feel about things that you've done, Jesus in this place only ever offers you undeserved, abundant blessing because it's who he is. At Good Shepherd, we are not perfect, but we seek to be a church guided by grace. And when we live by grace, when we're guided by it, we experience true abundance. And for that, I say, amen.